How's everybody doing today? Fantastic. Glad you guys are here. Before we get started with Follow the Leader, there's another card that is sitting in your seat. It's a little black card that says Awaken Church Block Party. Everybody hold that up so I know you know what I'm talking about. Fantastic. That is not your invitation to the block party. Your invitation is right here. I want you guys to all come to the block party. I'll tell you what that card's for here in just a second, but just to let you guys know what it is and what we're doing, 2 weeks from yesterday, right out here, my left, your right, we will be hosting the Awaken Block Party. Literally every year we have hundreds of families from our community come out to be a part of this day. It is a really, really, really incredible thing. We set up giant slides, obstacle courses, big inflatable things that the kids love, but I think the adults end up liking a little bit more, if I'm honest. And because we have a lot of adults that show up early to set up, we're going to call it, and end up going down the slides quite a few times. And so incredible opportunity there. Lots of free food, free things for the entire family. So if you know anybody that likes a lot of fun and free food, make sure that you invite them out to be a part of this. And you get to be a part not only of inviting them, but this is an opportunity for you to help serve people in and around our community. So you have the opportunity, if you want to today, stop by the guest services table on your way out, and you can just sign your name that says you would like more information about how you can be involved in helping. You're not signing your life away. You're not guaranteeing that you have to help, but you're saying, I would like more information about how I can be a part of that, and somebody will contact you this week. We need people to help serve food. We need help, making sure the kids don't fall off the top of the slide, those kind of things. So no matter what your skill set is, we could use you on that day. Now that invite card that is sitting on your seat, like I said, that's not your invite, but I want you to take that with you today, because this week or next week, I want you to take that and invite somebody with you to be a part of this day. And if there's an empty seat beside you, congratulations, today is your lucky day. You can take that one as well, and you get to invite 2 people with you. Yeah, I'm the only one that's as excited about this as we should be excited, but the rest of you are going to pick up your excitement and enthusiasm throughout the morning. I can see it on your faces. So today we are going to continue on in our conversation about following the leader, and the idea behind this series is that a couple thousand years ago there was a guy named Jesus who came along and called this group of followers to himself. There were actually 3 different types of people that followed Jesus around. The first group that followed Jesus around was this religious elite group that was just kind of there to try to trap him and trick him and get him to say something wrong. And then there was this other group that was just kind of there. They were the crowd. They were just there for the free things. They were there for the show. They loved seeing the miracles. And then there was this other group of people called the disciples, the true followers of Jesus. These are the Matthew, Mark, Luke, Matthew, you get the idea. John, Peter, these guys. I'm about to just start reading through names. That's not, okay, anyway. So you get the idea that these guys were the ones that followed Jesus around. They wanted to be like him. They wanted to imitate him. They wanted to emulate him. They wanted him to be their rabbi. And in doing that, they were able to follow him around for years, learn from him, learn to become like him, follow his teaching, and it led to them being able to do one of the greatest single things in human history. They literally changed the world. They changed history forever simply because they followed this guy, Jesus, around. And what we've learned so far is that everybody turn to the person beside you and say, he's talking to you, just to make sure that we're all here. You have already been invited to be a part of this journey. That's right. And you are already pre-qualified to be a follower of Jesus. It doesn't matter about your past. It doesn't matter about your present. You are pre-qualified to be a follower of Jesus. And he has extended an invitation to you that says, come follow me no matter what you are doing in life. Matter of fact, if you're like, I'm just the worst person ever, don't worry. That's a prerequisite to being a follower of Jesus. Everybody was before they became a follower of Jesus. And so you have the opportunity, and you are pre-qualified to be a follower of Jesus. And he's extended that invitation to you. And then last week we learned, just to kind of get caught up, we learned that Jesus in his most famous sermon, which is found in the first book of the New Testament, Matthew, we learned that he started off his most famous talk called the Sermon on the Mount in kind of a weird way. He started off by telling everybody how to find happiness and contentment and joy in your life. And I think the reason that he did that is because he knew that that would affect every single area of your life. Have you ever noticed how your attitude about things affects every part of your life? It affects your relationships, it affects your family, it affects your job. So your attitude about life, whether you're happy and joyful and peaceful and content with life, it will affect every single part of your life. And Jesus knew that, so he started it off. And listen, I asked you guys to do something a couple weeks ago. I asked you to commit to this series. Just something simple. Commit to this series. And what I mean by that is I would love for you to be here every single Sunday morning of this series, 9 or 10:30. It doesn't matter. Same thing, both services. But I would love for you to be here every single Sunday morning. If something comes up and you had to miss for some reason, you can always go online and watch whatever week you have missed. And so if you're 2 weeks behind already, don't worry. You can get caught up and you can go the rest of the way through without missing a single one. And if you miss for any reason, make sure you get caught up. Everybody got it? Good. So today we're going to continue on in Jesus' conversation found in Matthew chapter 6. But before we get there, this is that same sermon that he was preaching last week called the Sermon on the Mount. But before we get there, this subject that we're going to talk about today is one of the most important things that we talk about in the world, and it applies to everybody, whether you're a church person or not a church person. This is something that applies to everybody, and if you want to be a follower of Jesus here this morning, and you want to be a true disciple, not just part of the crowd, but you want to be a disciple, this is something that you really have to pay attention to. For everybody else, it's just kind of free good advice. But if you want to be a follower of Jesus this morning, this is something that you really have to pay attention to, even though it may make you a little uncomfortable. Whenever I bring this subject up, I always get a few people that roll their eyes or cross their arms and start thinking about lunch. Now listen, I think about lunch a lot too, but let's just try to focus in for the next 25 minutes or so and hammer this out, okay? So the subject that we're going to be talking about that Jesus spent more time talking about than heaven, that he spent more time talking about than hell, that he spent more time talking about than faith, combined, is what to do with wealth, finances, and stuff that we have in our lives. Jesus spent an incredible amount of time that we know about dealing with this subject. The Old Testament of the Bible spends an incredible amount of time dealing with this subject. And I want to make sure that we spend a great deal of time dealing with this subject because Jesus knew something. He knew 2,000 years ago that this was still going to be an issue, that this was still going to be a problem, that we were still going to have to focus in on this thing. So we're going to talk about this thing. And before you tune out, zone out, get that look on your face that says, here's the pastor again who's just after my money. We already took the offering. We're not taking it again. Okay? Not after your money. Don't want your money. That's not what this is about. This is what we want for you, not from you. And I want you to start today with that belief because this could really, really change your life if you really get this down and you really understand what Jesus and really the whole Bible has to say about wealth, finances, and stuff in your life. This could be life-changing. And if you want to be a follower of Jesus, this is something that you have to pay attention to. You have to really, really get behind. For everybody else, this is just really, really good advice that you should probably take. Now, before you start thinking to yourself, well, I just don't like this whole God and money thing being combined. I prefer to keep my life kind of separated, and I'm not really into this thing. You've probably already combined it at some point in your life, and you're the kind of person that's like, church and politics, don't ever talk about them together. They stay separate, and God and money, we keep them separate. And that's kind of funny that people have that thought because most people who have that thought, and maybe you've had that thought, you've actually already combined God and money in your life, and you haven't even realized that you did it. Like, maybe there was that time that you were really, really wanting your house to sell, and it had been on the market for a while, and so you just kind of prayed this prayer, God, please let this sell, right? And maybe it was just like a good luck prayer, right? And you didn't even know what you were praying to the Force or Luke Skywalker or something. You had no idea what was going on, but you just kind of prayed this prayer, like if somebody's out there, please help me to get a new car. If somebody's out there, please help me to figure out how to pay these bills, right? And you pray those kind of prayers, and it's always funny that we are definitely okay combining God as money as long as we think we're going to get money out of it. We're just not good combining God and money when we think it's going to cost us something. And so this morning, I want you to put all that out of your head, and maybe you're thinking, well, goodness, this Christianity thing is it's got a lot to it when it comes to money. Maybe I'm just going to abandon this whole thing and go to another religion. Hopefully you're not thinking that, but listen, before you plan on doing that, every major religion of the world that's got documented stuff about how to worship God, almost all of them have something to do with how you deal with money in your life. So you can't escape it. This is a really, really important thing. And especially when it comes to the Bible that we believe, the Old Testament and the New Testament, it says so much about this subject, you just can't ignore it and really be a follower of Jesus. Being a follower of Jesus means that you're going to listen and you're going to learn to operate within what Jesus said about money, wealth, and stuff. Everybody got it? Now, the thing is, and we'll deal with this a little bit more detail later, a lot of times people will tune out right here because you kind of know, or you kind of think you know what I'm going to say about this. You think I'm going to start telling you right now, you have to give 10% of your money to the church, and that's called a tithe, and you need to do it. And that's not all that I'm going to say. Wait for laughter, because there is so much more to this subject. That's just the stepping off point. That really is just like the bottom line, basic first step. And if you're not living in obedience to that first step, you're not going to be able to be a disciple of his the way that we want you to be a disciple of his. But that's just a stepping off point. This is such a bigger subject. The Bible has way more to say about money than just giving. And so if you have your Bible, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 6. If not, we're going to throw it up on the screen behind me so you can read it. But Jesus says two statements back to back here, just 3 verses apart, that he said 2,000 years ago that are just extraordinarily brilliant. And even if you're not a God, Jesus, church kind of person, you're going to look at this and you're going to be like, that makes sense. He says this in verse 21. He says, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Seems simple, right? For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You know, people tend to judge people like me, my spirituality, based on the fact that I'm a pastor, based on the fact that I'm standing here preaching and you're not. So you tend to look at me and be like, wow, he must be a spiritual leader, must be a spiritual giant. He must have, all the ducks in a row, all that stuff. But you know what Jesus says? Jesus says, if you really want to know where his treasure is, where his heart is, don't look at him preaching. Don't even look at his Bible and how marked up it may be. Jesus says, if you really want to know where his heart is, look at where his treasure is. That's a tough thing. Jesus says, if you really want to know where my heart is, look at your bank account. Look at your stuff. And that's a hard teaching. And he says the same thing is true for you. He says, if you really want to know where your heart is, it's not in the things that you do, all the things that you do. It's in where your treasure is and where your pursuit of treasure is. Now, you may have dealt with somebody. Anybody ever have a relationship with somebody? It's not like, it doesn't have to be like a romantic relationship. It could be husband and wife. I had some people elbowing each other this morning. Don't do that. If you're married, don't elbow each other if this example fits you. But it could be a friendship. It could be just family members. But just think about this. Have you ever had that person that you just knew that they loved their stuff a little more than they liked you? You're laughing because you know it's true. If you're not laughing, it's probably you are that person that loves stuff more than, yeah. I remember when I was a teenager, I had a neighbor who was a couple years older than me. I was probably 14 at the time, and his parents bought him a brand new convertible sports car when he was 16 years old and first got his driver's license. Teenagers in the room were like, yes. Parents in the room were like, horrible idea, right? It was a horrible idea. But I remember being excited about this because he was kind of the first one of our group that was going to get to drive, and we were like, we're going to get rides everywhere we want to go. We lived in Chickamauga, Georgia, so there was a lot of things to do there. And so, it's just kind of like, we're going to get to go and do a lot of things. It's going to be fun. And I start walking over to his house the day that he got his car, and he's standing outside just looking at it. And I get about 20 feet away from it, and he just yells, "Stop!" I stopped. I just kind of looked at him. He was like, "I don't want you coming any closer than that." I was like, "Are you serious?" He's like, "Yeah, if you scratch this or get a smudge on it, it's going to be really bad news. Probably won't be able to be friends anymore. So I just need you to stay about 20 feet away." I was like, I thought maybe we'd go for a ride. He was like, "No, nobody's going for a ride in this car." And I started realizing at that moment, he was a decent friend at the time, but he really liked or loved his car more than he liked me as a friend. And there are people in your life who you may have experienced the exact same thing with. It didn't have to be a car. It could be with anything. People like or love their stuff more than they like you. And people certainly like or love their stuff or their wealth or their things more than they like or love Jesus. And Jesus says, if that's true, that's where your heart is. And your heart can never be with him if your heart is with your wealth and your stuff. And Jesus starts laying this foundation that goes way beyond just giving 10% or not giving 10%. It goes to a core of a serious problem that people have had from the beginning of time with wealth and stuff that says that it's going to compete with our heart for God. And Jesus says, if your heart is with your treasure, that's where your heart's going to be, instead of in a relationship with Jesus. And Jesus says, that's not exactly what you want it to go like. I've learned to try to get things. If I'm going to buy something or purchase something, I've kind of got this unwritten rule, unstated rule, that I never want to have something that I wouldn't be comfortable loaning out to somebody else. And I said that in first service, and several people walked up after service to me and asked me if I would be willing to let them borrow certain things of mine. And so I thought about not even saying it in this service. But it's true. I try not to have things that I wouldn't be willing to loan out, because I never want my stuff to have me. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying, is he doesn't want to get in a battle for your heart. He won't get in a battle for your heart. If you want to have a relationship with God, what Jesus says, the most important thing is to put your treasure in that pursuit. Understand what's most important, and it's not wealth and stuff. And then he goes on to say this just a couple verses later. In verse 24, he says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other, because you cannot serve both God and... What do you think everybody thought he was going to say there? Great back and forth. Love it. Satan. You thought people were probably thinking, because God and Satan, right? And if you're having that debate, we can have another conversation later. But listen, the reality is he said you can't serve both God and money, which seemed a little odd to everybody. I bet they were just kind of like, God and money? Really? That's what you wanted to say right there? God and money. Because the reality is, Jesus, I feel like I can serve God and money. And Jesus says you can't serve both God and your wealth. And this goes right along with what he was saying there. The most important thing that you can do is have a pursuit of that relationship. But money and wealth and things and stuff. And it's not wrong to have money. It's not wrong to have wealth. It's not wrong to have things. But when they take the place of God in your life, Jesus says it's a serious problem. And if this conversation makes you a little uncomfortable and you're kind of just like, I'm just not so sure about this, I want you to understand something. You can trust Jesus on this subject. The reason that you have a hard time trusting Jesus on this subject is because of somebody like me at some point in time who's got up in front of you and said something that was very, very wrong or abusive about this subject, and it has made you have horrible feelings about this subject. But that has nothing to do with Jesus. That has everything to do, like you read things about pastors not paying taxes, and pastors don't have to do that, and they live in multi-million-dollar homes. I would like to meet that pastor. I need to have some conversations with him, because that's not the reality of my life, right? And you see these multi-million-dollar crystal cathedrals that pastors have churches in, and you look and you say, man, the church must be just all about my money, and that's caused you to have a distrust about this subject. And the reality is you can trust Jesus when it comes to this area of wealth and stuff and finances in your life. You can trust him more than you can trust anybody. You know how many times Jesus asked for money in the New Testament? Anybody got to guess how many times we have recorded that Jesus asked for money? Some people say none. The reality is maybe one. Maybe one. When there was this time that people were asking him about taxes, and he said, well, show me a coin. And maybe they handed him the coin, and he said, well, whose face is that? And they said, Caesar. And he said, well, give to Caesar what's Caesar's. Now, we don't think, I guess he could have just pocketed that and ran off. But that doesn't seem to go with his character, so he probably gave it back to the person right then and there. And so Jesus is not interested in taking something from you. He wants something for you. And most importantly, he wants to make sure that your money does not have you. He doesn't want to make sure that you don't have money. And I need you to really understand that. He wants to make sure that your stuff doesn't have you. It's not that he doesn't want you to have stuff. He doesn't want that to have your heart. But he knew right from the beginning that it would be the chief competition for your heart. And for centuries and centuries and millennia now, it has been competition for people's hearts. It has taken people away from a relationship with God, and people have a very difficult time pursuing the relationship with God because they end up pursuing this pursuit of wealth and stuff. So what are we supposed to do about it? And here's the deal. Old and New Testament kind of has this great line here that really, it's complete. It follows the same pattern. The things that were taught in the Old Testament, Jesus came and taught maybe in a slightly different way. But David, who was a king in the Old Testament, gives us actually some really incredible insight into this subject with this prayer that he prayed one time. And it's found in First Chronicles. If you want to turn there, we'll be there in just a few minutes. But let me try to, First Chronicles 29. If not, again, it'll be up behind me here. But let me try to set the stage a little bit for what's happening here. So David's the king of Israel, and he's been like this warrior king for a number of years. He's gone and he's conquered all these other nations, drove them all out of their kingdom. And now he's back in Jerusalem. He's the king of Israel. Israel's a rich, wealthy, well-fortified, incredible kingdom. And all the other nations around them, they're kind of the envy of these other nations. Everybody wants to be them. They've got everything going great because David was a great king. And then David looked out the window one day, or maybe he just had a thought. For whatever reason, he looked outside and he saw that God was still living in a tent. Now let me explain what that means. In the Old Testament, go all the way back to when Moses led the people out of Israel, and then he went up on a mountainside, and God gave him some commandments, and he wrote them down, and he brought them back. They put them in a box. They called this the Ark of the Covenant. And this is where God's presence kind of dwelt in. And they would carry this thing with them wherever they went. When they would conquer these places, they would carry this thing, and they brought it, and they would set it somewhere. Then they would build this elaborate tent around it, and they called this the tabernacle. And they would put this tent up wherever they went, and they had to keep it mobile. Then they got to Jerusalem, and they finally have this place that's theirs. They don't have to move anymore. But guess where they've kept God? In that tent. And this is just proof that camping is like the worst thing that you can possibly do, because even God doesn't want to stay in a tent, right? This proves that hotel camping is way better than tent camping, for anybody that's ever wondered and had that debate. And so God is living in this tent, and David says, we got a serious problem here. I can't live in a palace, have all of you live in these wonderful places, and keep God in the tent. And God's like, that's what I've been saying, right? We don't want to do this anymore. And so David begins to talk with God about this plan, about what to do about the tabernacle and how to build him a temple instead. And God looks at David, and he's like, you know what? I like the plan, but here's the problem. You can't be the one to build me this temple. You can't be the one to get me out of the tent and get me out of the house, because you've been a warrior king. You've shed a lot of blood. You've got a lot of murder on your hand, if you guys remember those stories. David was not the easiest, it wasn't the best case scenario. And so God says, because of all this, you can't be the one to build me my house. And if I was David, I'd have been like, I'm the king. I'll do what I want, right? But David was a humble guy. He didn't do that. He said, okay, I think I understand what you're saying, God. I think I understand that I can't be the one to do this. But I want to get it set up so that my son, who's going to be the king next, Solomon, I'm going to get it set up for him so that it's just like a slam dunk. He can easily go in here, take care of this, build your house, and everybody will be happy for him. That's great. And so David, he sets out, and he begins hiring all these architects, right? And he begins hiring all the people to get everything organized. He begins buying things. He actually takes money out of the treasury, all this gold and silver, and he actually pours a lot of his own wealth into this. One scholar, I don't know if this is true, but one scholar said that he believes that if you look at it, David poured about the equivalent of $14 billion worth of his own wealth into this temple that he wouldn't be able to build and that he would never even see started. That's crazy. If anybody here has $14 billion, I would love to have a conversation with you about that. But $14 billion that he put into this project, and he would never even see it started. That's incredible. And so David gets excited about this. He gets everything organized, and he realizes it's going to cost a lot of money. And so he calls together this meeting of all these people from the wealthy families from all over Israel, brings them all together into one place, and says, I need you to do something for me. This is going to be tricky, but I want you to donate your money. I want you to give of your wealth to this project. But here's the problem. Some of you won't even be alive when we start it. Even more of you won't be alive when it's finished. And very few of you, if any of you, will ever really see this as God's house. But I need you to give a lot of money towards this project. And you know what happened? People started giving. People started donating their gold and their silver and all that they had, their wealth. And they didn't do it begrudgingly. They didn't do it just because they were ordered to. They did it because they wanted to, because they cared enough, and they wanted God to be able to stop camping. They wanted him to have his own house. And so that's where the presence of God was going to be. And they started giving. And in the midst of that giving, David steps back, and he's overwhelmed. And he discovers something that I think is so valuable for us to remember. something so important that will be life-changing if you really get this down and understand what David's trying to say. And he prays this prayer in front of everybody, found in 1 Chronicles 29, verses 10 through 14. This is what he said. David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly, saying, "Praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor for everything." Everybody say that word with me one more time. For everything in heaven and earth is yours. Does that sound right? Is everything God's? I mean, don't you have some stuff? Right? Is everything God's? I think you already know this to be true. The reality is everything is God's because you can't take anything that's yours with you, right? You're just holding on to it for a little bit. Then somebody else will take it. Then somebody else will take it. Then it'll break down and be thrown in the dumpster, right? You can't take anything with you, so nothing you have is yours. You're just a steward of it. You're just kind of holding on to it while you got it. That's all that it is. And David has this realization that everything in heaven and earth is God's. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. And he says this, wealth and honor come from you. Not from me, from you. And he had $14 billion to give away. And he says, all my wealth is from you. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. Now, our God, we give you thanks and praise your glorious name. And then he closes with this. And I think this thought it captivated me, and I think it just captivated him. He said, but who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? Like, why should we even be allowed to do this? Because everything is yours anyway. He says, everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. And this word that keeps popping up here in this passage is everything. Everything. And I've tried to put together a sentence that would really articulate what David is trying to say and ultimately what Jesus would try to say many years later. And this is it. This is what I want us to really get down today. Our objective should be to honor God with what? To honor God with what? Everything. Now, this goes somewhat against what I've been taught, or at least it doesn't. What I've been taught doesn't really complete this thought. See, I've been taught that as long as I give 10% of what I have, which is a starting place, that's called the tithe, and we are all commanded to do that. And if we don't do that, technically we don't even get to give it. We just get to bring it because it already belongs to God. And if we don't, we're stealing it. All right, that's a fun way to open up the day here. And I've been taught that as long as I bring that 10%, it doesn't really matter what the other 90% does because it's mine and I get to do what I want with it, right? That's the way that kind of we think about this. But David and Jesus had a different view on this. They said, you should be able to honor God with all of it. Now, I've got a confession to make here for you. I never thought that I would be this person, but I love my minivan. You can laugh. Until you drive one, you'll never know. It's an incredible vehicle. You know, the door's open. I just got to press a button. I want to get the minivan that comes out next where you just look at a door and it just, right, just the doors pop open. It's coming. It's coming. Won't be long. The person that builds that thing will make $14 billion. But if I were to if you were to ask me, hey, can I borrow your minivan? I would be like, of course you can borrow my minivan. You know, where do you need to go? Do you need to take some people to the store? That's great. Now, if I let you borrow my van, what percentage of that van do you think that I would expect you to bring back looking good? 10%? 10%, right? Maybe you clean off the driver's side door, maybe vacuum out one little spot on the driver's side seat, but the rest of it could be completely trashed, right? Because I would only expect 10% of it to be okay. That's about how much sense it makes when God entrusts us with everything that he's entrusted us with. It doesn't matter whether you have a little bit or a lot of it. If you've got something that God has entrusted with you, he says, I want you to honor me with all of it, not just 10% of it. 10% is just the starting point to show that you trust me. It's not even about money. It's just a starting point to show that you trust me enough to take care of you. And if you can't even start there, but you need to take care of every single... Okay, I see some of you still aren't getting this. How many of you in the room are married? Okay, quite a bit of you. You know, we're coming up on 12 years here, and I remember the day, and I remember the wedding, and it's kind of funny because you're saying your vows to your spouse, your future spouse, for me, my wife, and and you're saying it to your wife and before God, but everybody in a room like this is kind of watching you, right? And especially the dad of the person you're about to marry, watching you. And I remember thinking these vows, I wonder if my father-in-law is saying, you know what? I hope he does choose to honor 10% of her. As long as he just feeds her, if he'll just give her food, that's all that matters, just 10%. All he needs to do is honor 10% of this relationship, and I'll be good. You think that's what he was thinking? No! He was thinking he better honor and cherish every bit of this person. And that's exactly what you're thinking. But why is it that when we get entrusted so much with God that we think, if I honor God with 10%, and some of you haven't even thought that yet, but if I honor God with 10%, that's all I've got to honor him with. Everything else is all whatever I want. See, I think some of us here in the room today, we need to say a prayer of surrender. Actually, all of us in the room today need to pray a prayer of surrender over every part of our wealth and stuff. And it's not that God doesn't want you to have wealth. It's not that God doesn't want you to have stuff. God just doesn't want it to have you. And in making this commitment to say, God, I'm going to honor you in every part of my wealth and stuff, it will change everything for you. It will bring a peace and contentment to your life. And it doesn't mean that you can't have money. It doesn't mean that you can't have stuff. But it means that it won't have you. And it means that it will not have your heart. And you can pursue Jesus with all of your heart if you pray this prayer. For some of you, praying this prayer of surrender in this area of your life, it'll mean that you need to start giving more. If you truly pray this prayer, it'll mean that you need to start trusting God with giving. But for some of you, it won't mean that at all. For some of you, it'll mean that you have to start trusting God with saving. You have been irresponsible and you haven't saved a dime for your retirement. You haven't saved a dime for your children, and you haven't saved anything. And God's going to look at you and say, you've been irresponsible with how you deal with the money, and I'm challenging you to save. You give everything away. For some of you, it's just going to be like, you know what? You just need to know where your money's going. You got like 7 Netflix accounts because you can't remember passwords, and you just need to figure out what's going on here, and you need to know where your money's going so that you can figure out what to do with it. But God wants you to honor him with everything. Jesus came along and he gave us this. He said, don't let your money have you. Don't serve it, because it's something that will always leave you empty, always leave you wanting more, always leave you uncontent. But honor God with all of it. Let's stand together. I want us to pray a prayer of surrender in this area of our life to close out our time together today. And I want you to take this seriously. Pray this prayer with me. Father, thank you again. We are grateful to be here, to be able to study your word. And God, today, help us to take seriously this teaching that you gave your disciples, to honor you with everything that we have. All of our wealth, all of our things belong to you. God, let us not just stop at 10%, but if that's a starting place, let us start there. But let us move on to honor you with everything in our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You guys have a great Sunday. We will see you back next week at 9 or 10:30. Have a great day, guys.